Welcome to the Healthy Relationships Initiative podcast. Our goal is to provide information and tools to help you build happier, healthier, and safer relationships of all kinds. To learn more about HRI, please visit www.guilfordhri.org and check us out on social media at GuilfordHRI.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Healthy Relationships Initiative Relationship Booster. The Healthy Relationships Initiative is a partnership between UNC Greensboro and the Phillips Foundation, and our mission is to promote happy, healthy, and safe relationships of all kinds in Guilford County and beyond. We encourage you to check out our website, guilfordhri.org, for more information and a lot of different resources on a lot of different types of relationship concerns, as well as connect with us on social media at GuilfordHRI on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just a couple housekeeping points to cover before we get started today. First of all, in the chat room, we have it set so that people will not see your questions, but we do encourage you to share questions. And the best way to do that is to send it as a message to either the group, and other people won't see that, or you can send it privately as a message to our moderator in the chat room, Camila Dos Santos. And at the end of the program today, before you sign off, we hope, and we'll remind you of this later in the program, but we hope that you'll take a couple minutes to fill out our feedback form, which we use to get information to help us improve our future programs. The topic of our program today is couples and money. My name is Christine Murray, and I'm the director of the Healthy Relationships Initiative, and I'm also a professor in the counseling department at UNC Greensboro. And our featured expert today is Tom Luzon, and he is the director of the Consumer Credit Counseling Service of Greater Greensboro, which is housed within Family Services of Piedmont. So welcome, Tom, and thanks for being here today.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so could you go ahead and share a little bit with our audience about your background and the work that you do and why you're interested in being part of our conversation today?
Well, my first life was in banking, so I was on that side of the fence. And then just by happenstance, I happened to get onto the nonprofit financial counseling side. So helping people adjust to what certain lenders have done to them. And it's been a very rewarding experience, and I've been able to work with some excellent agencies and some excellent counseling staffs. So we're a nonprofit financial counseling agency, and we also do housing counseling too. And we help families with their financial challenges and help them relieve the financial stress in their lives.
Great. So I know you're going to have a lot of insights to share today because you do this work all day, every day, working with people and their finances and helping them to get on a better path with their money, and especially a lot of the relationship concerns that come along with that. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into our discussion for today. And so it's great to have the chance to work with you again today because, as some of you may know, but not everybody knows, we actually partnered with Tom and the Credit Counseling Service for one of our HRI e-learning center programs on couples and money. So for those of you who might be interested in learning more about that, we'll share the link for that hopefully later in the program. But obviously the topic of money can be a major hot button issue for couples, for really individuals, but especially today we're talking about couples. So we've all heard the common information or the kind of so-called statistic that says that money is one of the greatest causes of divorce for people. And is that true? And if so, why do you think that it's such a difficult issue for couples to navigate?
I would say that it's definitely true. Because money issues create stress in a relationship, they create communication issues in a relationship, and they prevent you from being able to achieve any kind of financial goals. It just becomes an obstacle. And what a lot of people don't really realize is they don't take the approach that money is their second most important relationship. Their partner's relationship and their relationship with the family is first, but money is number two, and it's right there, and it really is involved in everything, okay? So just like when a couple gets together and they want to find out what you look for in a relationship, what you look for in a partner, they should also have the same type of questions about how they feel about money and how they feel about finances, because it's just as important to find out the person's attitude towards money, what has your experience has been with money, to see how compatible we are, where we stand with each other.
So that's a really interesting way to think about it, that a person sort of has a relationship with money, and course, with the Healthy Relationships Initiative, we talk about healthy relationships. So it seems like people could have healthy relationships with money, or how they view and handle money, and then unhealthy relationships with money. And so you're saying that it's important to consider how partners come together around that issue.
Right, and also whether or not their views and attitudes about money and the relationship with money are compatible with each other, okay, because that's what causes the strife if it's not addressed. And just like it can be a little difficult to communicate our attitudes and our experiences with relationships that we've had in the past, it can be just as difficult to try to explain our attitudes and relationship with money to the other person as well.
So let's talk about that for a minute. So, and I would think that, of course, we could think in a new couple, or as people are just getting to know each other in a romantic relationship, that could be something to talk about. But because money is such a difficult issue for people to talk about, you could be talking about a couple that's been married for 20 years that hasn't even had a conversation about their financial values. So what are some good ways that people can get that conversation started to learn about what each of them thinks in their values around money?
Okay. Well, one thing you learn when you're in counseling, which you're an expert on, is that if you really want to communicate with somebody, let them do the talking. Okay, so in order to find out where each person stands when it comes to their relationship and attitude towards money, is to start at the beginning and ask them about their experiences. You know, what are your experiences with money, with finance? You know, have you ever been through a time of economic instability? And if so, how did you deal with it? You know, what does money mean to you? You know, how important is money to your happiness or to your sense of security? And to see if we're on common ground. And even if we're not on common ground, it doesn't mean we can't meet halfway and create common ground.
And so before people really probably can have an effective conversation like that with a partner, a potential partner, there's a lot of self-awareness that goes into this too, and people need to learn how their own viewpoints too before they can really communicate that, right?
Yes, and I think we have to be open to that as the partner. It's not a conversation that you're going to have, you know, over dinner one night. Think of it as an ongoing conversation, because as things are being thought of and questions are being asked, you know, give each other time to, you know, think back on it and you know, dig in and peel back the layers to find out, you know, where they really stand and why they stand there.
Mm-hmm. Right, so really kind of getting a sense of that. So what do you think are going to some of the common financial challenges for couples? So we've already touched a little bit on maybe some different values, and we'll talk more about that later in the program. But what do you see as some of the really common struggles that couples have when it comes to money?
The biggest single issue that we see with folks that come in to see us is that they don't have a mutual spending plan in writing. Okay, the mutual spending plan means that both people are involved. They're involved equally in it, and they have mutually agreed to it, and they're playing by that rule they're setting up. Okay, and it has to be in writing because we need something to refer to in the event that we have to make adjustments because of a financial challenge that happened. So you need that plan in order to establish any kind of goals.
Is a spending plan the same thing as a budget?
Budget is the old-fashioned term for a spending plan. Yep. So we're just it took us years to make that change too, you know. But yeah, a spending plan is what was referred to as a budget. And a lot of times when you mention the word budget, people kind of like roll their eyes and stuff. Well, that's because they're able to sit down and on paper create a budget, but they don't know what to do with it. And it's not just a matter of having it on paper, but knowing how to work a budget too.
And a budget sort of feels, the word budget sort of feels very restrictive for a lot of people, right? But a spending plan is more about being intentional about how you're spending your money and maybe aligning that with your goals. And so it's a more positive way for people to think about coming together versus the limits that they might put on each other through a budget.
And that's why people are always hesitant to even establish a budget, because number one, they think, well, it's probably going to look ugly, and that's okay, that makes you normal, you know. But two, yes, it's going to constrain me, I'm not going to be able to do what I want. And that's really not the case. There are some things we'll talk about later on where actually a spending plan is uplifting, and it actually frees you to do what you want, at the same time relieving stress and helping you obtain goals.
And in the context of a couple relationship, you made the important point that it's really necessary for them to come together to develop this plan. So how often does that conversation happen? Is it something that they should talk about once a year or just one time, or is it more frequent, like maybe even monthly or even weekly?
A spending plan should be part of your daily life. what happens is, in the beginning, you have to be intentional about it, okay? So you have to intentionally think about it and review it. I don't expect people to pick up their budget view every morning and read it. But like, for instance, I have mine taped to the inside of my kitchen cabinet where my glasses are, because I'm in that cabinet at least twice a day. And even though I don't read it, seeing it in my peripheral vision when I open the cabinet door reminds me I have one. What happens is, if you stick to your budget and stick to working with it, it becomes natural. Okay, you start adapting it. And now you couldn't believe living without it. Okay, it's like buying a car that has a backup camera for the first time. You can't figure out how to work it, but then after a month, you can't figure out how you ever backed up without it. You know?
Yeah.
So the spending plan really becomes just part of the nature of the relationship, and if you have kids, they should be brought into it, so it becomes the nature of the family.
So even kids should have input if we're talking about a couple that has children.
Absolutely. We believe that anybody over the age of 5 should be brought into the budget process. That is because budgeting is a team sport, okay? Everybody has to participate and play for the team, because one bad apple can spoil the whole bunch, okay? But also, this is how we pass on our financial skills to our children, the next generation.
That's really interesting to think about. The parents can role model that for their children, and they're teaching them a skill that then they can use throughout their lives
Yes.
as well. So just as a sort of on a real practical point, so coming up with a spending plan, what if you had partners that just one of them wanted to spend, you know, $300 a month on going out to restaurants, and the other thought it should be more like $50 a month? What can they do when there's differences like that? Because it is sometimes about the nitty-gritty of the spending.
That is a great question, and that's going to help me illustrate why a spending plan is uplifting and freeing, okay? You can have folks who have different things they want to do. Maybe one person wants to spend money on expensive things and luxury things. The other person is a saver and wants to save money. So it's like, well, we can't create a budget. Well, yes, you can. You can create a budget that allows for both, okay? You can create a budget where there's a certain amount of money that goes to each person individually each month that they can use it at their discretion. So if one person wants to go and spend it, they can go and spend it. If the other person wants to establish their own savings account and save it, they can establish their own savings account and save it, okay? So as long as it's all sticking to the budget and not blowing the budget out, if it's in there, they can work together.
And by talking about it ahead of time when they're creating the plan, it seems like it would avoid a lot of potential conflict later on when somebody might spend the money that the other person wouldn't agree with or doesn't know about. And so it's more proactive. So kind of that's another way that I would think that it would be uplifting for them. It's sort of coming together around the financial goals.
Right, it allows them to do, you know, what they like to do, because if you work hard, you know, you get to reward yourself in the ways that you want to be rewarded. So some people want to be able to go out and buy something, and some people want to see the reward sitting in the bank. And either way is fine. But also, you can have what you want to have, but still, since you have a budget, you're still getting towards your financial goals. Mm-hmm. So the sacrifice has been contained.
Right. And so we want to keep our conversation today, because we have a pretty short time, but we really do want to keep it focused on the financial issues and the money issues. But one thing that we did actually in the full-length e-learning center program was we referred people back to our other program on conflict. But obviously just bringing good, solid conflict management skills, good communication skills would be important to apply to this particular issue. And so we've got a lot of resources that we definitely encourage people to check out through Guilford HRI, our website, and the e-learning center. But I think the one key kind of approach with that is the importance of coming into it, that it's not just going to be one person getting their way or the other person getting their way, but there's a process of communicating and compromising, and so how can both people feel good about it and working toward both goals, even if maybe the goals are kind of different.
Well, it's all done through honest communication, okay? And start at the basic exploratory level, okay? Don't jump right into, well, how do you balance your checkbook, you know? Mm-hmm. Go back and say, find out how the other person feels about money, how the other person has related to money, okay? And then start from there, because that's the basic building blocks that you're going to put something together with. It also helps you understand the other person's financial language. Okay, because we may use the same term, but based on your background and experience and based on mine, they may mean very different things. Okay, so it helps us establish a common language together so we're really understanding each other.
So what are some of the other things, because we've talked about a few things, having these open conversations, understanding each other, but what do you think are some of the other key things that differentiate couples who are able to have a lot of shared values and a lot of cooperation around money versus those who just, their whole relationship crumbles around financial issues?
Okay, well the couples that are good at communicating with each other and also in their financial relationship as well, they will have a spending plan in place, okay? And they know that this is their guide to keep them on track towards their goals. So when something happens, they'll sit down and they'll agree on what the solution to the challenge is, and then they'll see what adjustments they're agreeing to make in their finances. Now, the adjustments may be temporary, you know, for a few months until we've overcome it, or it may be a permanent adjustment, but they both agreed to it, okay? So there's no resentment, there's no being left out, there's no confusion. If a couple has not been communicating in their financial relationship, then when they have an issue that happens, when they have a challenge, then they start pulling, you know, for a financial straw to try to plug the hole and make it stop. And the problem is they don't know the impact of removing money around or using income for this now. And that can create a ripple effect, which causes long-term stress. And with the long-term stress comes a number of different relationship impacts that are negative, and that tends to make things even more difficult now.
Yeah, so as with conflict in a lot of areas in couple relationships, it can start potentially small, but then if they're not navigating it effectively, they're not using good communication or conflict management skills, it can get worse and worse. And then on top of just the relationship issues, I imagine it's really stressful for a lot of couples to have really significant financial challenges to deal with. Financial stressors on their own are a major issue, but then you add the relationship challenges on top of that.
Well, yes, and also usually a partner will understand like the triggers that the other partner has for certain things, and there are certain things they're comfortable with and certain things they're not, and so they kind of like tiptoe, you know, in and around those triggers. Well, it's really better to get an understanding of those triggers, why they're there and where they come from, and try to develop a mutual understanding that, you know, you can't block me out from this area. I need access to you over here, you know, and in that way, when something comes up, I don't want to be afraid to approach you with it, okay? I don't want to feel like I have to figure out on my own how we do this, okay? So I need you to participate, be my partner.
Right, so really being direct and asking somebody, you know, to kind of be a team around this particular issue. And what are some other helpful things that people can say or do in the context of a couple relationship to understand each other's values better or understand how to talk about these issues and what's comfortable for each other?
Really establishing a conversation and taking the approach that, okay, money is a relationship we have, and it's a relationship that affects our personal relationship as well. And so with that understanding, you want to really try and take a different approach and understand the other person's attitude. Somebody may have a money habit that just rubs you the wrong way. That doesn't automatically make them a bad person. And you can't assume their motivation for doing that. Okay, they may not realize, to them it may not be a bad way at all because they grew up that way. Okay, so it's a matter of finding out, okay, tell me how you feel about money and what money means to you, okay, and help me understand that. Because now I'm learning how to talk to you about it. And we're learning how to work things out. Because if we're going to find middle ground, we have to know where we stand for it in the first place.
And also, it seems like their self-reflection piece would be really important there, too, because something the other person might be doing might be rubbing you the wrong way, and maybe they're actually doing it the right way, you know, and so we have to understand our own viewpoints, too, and understand maybe where we're coming from and be open to the possibility that we might have some viewpoints that could be challenged too.
Sure, and if somebody is meeting all their financial goals and doesn't have any financial stress, then chances are they have learned the right things about money and they have worked on their relationship with money and they have mastered it. Mm-hmm. If they have a partner who is still struggling, okay, then they need to take an approach of almost being like the teacher or the mentor. Mm-hmm. I'm going to guide you because it would be great if you were in the same place I'm in. Yeah. Okay. Not that the values are exactly the same, but the way that we're handling it and what we've learned from it, let me show you what I've learned.
Right, and hopefully they're open to hearing that,
yeah.
too. It looks like we have a question that came in.
We do. What are your thoughts about couples who may have one that sort of takes the lead on finances and the other who may choose not to be involved at all?
That's an interesting question to ask somebody who works where I work. When we have clients that come in and one person is in charge of everything when it comes to the money, we start to look to see if this is a control situation, and if this person is exercising control over their partner. And if that's the case, then we're going to dig a little bit deeper to see what the reason for that is. On the other hand, there are people who they don't have a good financial, their financial values are not relational, so they're not working together, okay? So they need to take a step back and need to revisit their financial relationship, okay, to get that in line. You can have somebody who's in control, which might be perfectly fine with the other partner, okay, and then that's okay. But if it's causing stress, if it's causing self-esteem issues, then they need to sit down and talk and rework their financial relationship.
And I think I would add to that too, that I think that even that it's natural in couples for one to maybe be more interested in that, right? So they might come together around talking through the spending plan, but both of them don't have to sit down and pay every single bill together. So I think in most couples, you do have one person who's more likely to be kind of managing the business of it, but it is really important for both of them to be part of the discussions about the spending plan, the financial goals. I think in this day and age where, you know, anything can happen at any time, it's really important for everybody to be, even if you're not as comfortable with financial issues and financial matters, to make sure you're aware of your financial situation in your family, know where important documents are, know what your family status is too, so that you're able to be kind of part of those conversations. So I think that there is an element where that's a natural piece of some couple relationships, but that it can, even if it's not a controlling situation, it's important for both people to be at least informed and part of the important discussions.
Sure, they should both be aware of what the family spending plan and financial goals are, and they'll take different parts in it. Mm-hmm. And one person may be really interested in doing all the numbers and that kind of stuff, and the other partner says, you know, I'd rather go watch the game. I know what you're doing, I know why we're doing it, and I'm good with it. And that's fine.
Yeah, but that is a great question because that's a very common thing that happens. So we have another question.
It sort of leads us into our next question, which is it possible for couples to have such different money habits and beliefs that they never find common ground and are never able to work as a team?
It's hard to imagine that being the case and their personal relationship is going just fine. Because it's really a coming together of two people. And when two people come together, they come together on so many different levels, okay? So one of them is financial. And they can be polar opposites, but still find middle ground, because otherwise you're going to have two spending plans, you're going to have two sets of goals, and I mean, I don't see how that works as a relationship goes. I mean, that's what relationship means, right? Mm-hmm. So they should really, even though they don't have to give up their souls for middle ground, okay? But there are ways of doing it, and if you're creative enough, and if you get the help of a counselor or a financial coach, if you're having a hard time finding middle ground.
Yeah, it seems like that would be a difficult area if you completely aren't on the same page about that. It would be something that if you're not able to come to some resolution or ways to manage those differences, that it would just start to, as you said earlier, really seep into different areas of their relationship and probably cause a lot of relationship distress at that point.
And I would think that signs would have shown up in the very beginning of the relationship before there was too much personally invested in the relationship. But it's hard to imagine that a relationship that both people are interested in, invested in, would not be able to find middle ground intentionally.
Yeah, and we did a program a couple weeks ago on healthy dating relationships, and this does seem like a very important topic for couples who are dating and just getting to know each other to really get clear on what the other person's values are on this topic.
Yes, and there's a certain gradation of things you want to find out about the other person as the relationship gets more and more involved.
That's right.
But then for some reason we tend to stop right when it gets to finances and don't talk about it, and that's what we should talk about.
Yeah, or people might kind of talk around it a little bit and not talk about some specifics. And like you're saying, as the relationship progresses, the more and more detail that people should be talking about, and more specifics and openness, and how much debt do they have, what are their financial goals, what are their views on material viewpoints, and that sort of thing. It's just really important to get more and more understanding.
Sure, because it's hard to have a goal that doesn't involve finances in one way, shape, form, or another.
Mm-hmm. And definitely that's another kind of unique aspect of this issue too, is that when people are married, then there are legal ramifications to the financial issues too, so it's really important to be on the same page there and have that understanding. So what's our next question?
So you brought up marriage, and that leads us to our next question, which is, what if two people in a relationship are planning to get married but come from very different financial backgrounds and maybe even a different social status? What should they think about before getting married, and does this difference put a strain on the relationship?
This can raise a very difficult situation. The ones that we've seen that are the hardest are the ones where the differences in their financial attitudes and financial realities are based on religion. Because some religions come into play and have different approaches towards finances about what you can and can't do. But again, they have to recognize that there are differences, and okay, I'm starting from here, you're starting from here. And if we want to have a relationship, we have to be somewhere in the middle. And you don't want to ask somebody to give up something that they're morally against, but that would just mean that maybe you have to make more of the adjustment then. So depending upon what each person has to give up or adjust to get to that middle, if somebody's asked to give up something that just goes against their grain, then the other person will have to move a little bit more to compensate for that.
But it is really important to talk about those issues, especially a lot of couples will talk about financial issues as part of their premarital counseling. They might even do some, sort of financial planning, or, really talking about those issues as part of that. And it sounds from your experience, you see people who are kind of maybe further along with some of the financial challenges, but it seems like if there are glaring differences and they're not addressed at that point before you make a major life commitment to somebody, it could spell a lot of trouble later on.
Well, what we've seen more and more is young couples who want to get married, but one of them has a lot of student loan debt, and it scares the other person,
Yeah.
And so they say, I've never borrowed anybody that's borrowed that much money in my life without having a house to go with it, And those things, they do have to be talked about and planned out and look at the impact it has on what our finances are going to look like.
But I do think it's important on a sort of more positive or hopeful note. People can work through those differences, and so you could have somebody who grew up in a very affluent family and somebody who grew up in a family where there weren't a lot of financial resources, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to be able to have a healthy marriage or a healthy relationship. It probably means they're going to have to work harder to come to on the same page around certain aspects of these.
But also they could appreciate each other's perspective, and the two joined together makes a stronger bond.
That's right. So the more people can really have a sense of valuing the other person's perspective, I think is important. So looks like we have another related question.
This question comes from a current graduate student, and it mentions that in internship, she has seen that several couples will fight about money, but maybe that's not the primary issue. Money becomes a secondary issue in the argument. Is that something that you see as professionals, and what do you do when values that have been ingrained from childhood are the cause of these issues? There's a follow-up. Would addressing these differences first help with financial challenges?
That's what you have to kind of do a deep dive into. If there's a communication problem, then you have to find out, okay, how come the other person is maybe not being as candid as they could be? Okay, so are they withholding something about either a spending habit or something that they've done, an experience or something? Because then the other person is going to start thinking, well, if they're withholding on that, what else are they going to withhold on? Just like if you don't want to tell your partner something because it might upset them, well, what other excuse are you going to have for not communicating? So yeah, you'd have to, if couples are fighting over money, sometimes it is just an issue. I don't believe you went out and spent that much money on a car. But sometimes if it's a pattern, then there's probably something underlying it that's more important to look at.
So those financial issues can really reveal other significant issues in the relationship, like trust issues, like you're mentioning, compatibility, values, communication. Are they communicating well about certain things? And one of the things that I think is really cool about money when we're talking about couple relationships is that it's a very specific and practical issue, and it does give a platform or an opportunity for couples to learn to talk about something that's very concrete, that can give them sort of a win and help them to learn skills that they could apply to even maybe some more like the trust issues, right? So let's start with coming together on a spending plan, and then maybe we can dig deeper into some of those issues too. So it could be a great starting point for couples to come together, even if it's not, as that question mentioned, maybe the primary issue is bringing them in for counseling.
Sometimes the financial issue is the symptom, not the problem.
That's right, yeah. So let's move on to talk about a few very specific financial challenges. I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of these because we know that they're common experiences for a lot of couples. So let's talk a little more about that one where we've got a couple where there's one person who hides their spending from the other person, or it could be hiding a lot of debt. I know people who have had that experience where they didn't even know the person had a lot of debt, and maybe they were engaged, and they didn't learn about it till that point. So what about when people are hiding financial, whether it's spending or other financial concerns? What would you suggest for that?
I would suggest the first step in solving that issue is to find out why there's hiding going on, okay? It's easy to blame the person who's doing the hiding, but maybe they're doing the hiding because the other person is not giving them the freedom to bring it out into the light of day. So that's what we have to find out, is that why are we holding back? Who's causing it? Am I causing that? Am I causing you to do that? Or is it something from you that's causing it to happen? So that's the first thing to do and to get that settled. Then once that's done, they have to revisit, they have to say, okay, we have our personal relationship and we both agree we're good on that, but now the financial relationship we have to sit down and talk about and get that back on track.
So it's really important to remember that honesty is really important in relationships, and keeping that, not only is it potentially just keeping them having some distance, but it can really lead to some problems with trust later on, which of course can be a much bigger issue too. But as you mentioned, there might be a certain sense that they can't be honest about it because they're afraid that the person might judge them or they're controlling them. So there's a lot of different ways that that specific issue could look.
And also it could be where a person might say, well, I thought it would upset you if I told you about this. And the person says, that would have upset me. Where would that come from? And if they gave it some thought, they may have realized, well, that's the way my parents were. My father or my mother didn't tell the other person because they'd immediately, blast off. And that's really what I'm assuming happens. So it really wasn't you, it was just something I experienced early on.
Yeah, but being open and honest about this issue is something that obviously relates to openness and honesty in all other areas of their lives too.
It's the only way a relationship can financially flourish, is if it's open and honest and mutual.
Yeah, definitely. We talk about honesty and trust being a really key part of healthy relationships in general. So it looks like we have a couple other questions.
We do. How should people who may have lost a partner, either through divorce or death, handle their finances afterwards?
Anytime, okay, hopefully everybody's on a spending plan, and anytime there's a change to either income or expenses, whether anything's going up or going down, the plan needs to be revised. In the event of, I'm assuming, reduced income due to a death or a divorce, then what the family has to do is sit down and revise the spending plan to reflect that difference, okay? If who's ever in the house over the age of 5 participates and everybody agrees, okay, well, we're going to cut out cable, but only for 6 months until we get this credit card paid off, and then we'll put the cable back. And in that way, there's no stress, there's no infighting, there's no resentment. So they would just have to sit down and revise that plan, and that's why the plan is a living, breathing thing. It lives with us.
One thing that I think is also really helpful for people who are single, whether it is through divorce or just being single in general, would be to find somebody that they can talk to. So it might be a professional, like someone in your role, it could be a counselor, but it also could be a friend or a family member or somebody that, because financial decisions can be very difficult. And so if you're single and you don't have somebody that you're making those decisions with, it can be helpful to have somebody that you trust and that knows maybe more details about your financial situation than the average person in your life.
And that's the interesting choice between financial counseling and financial coaching. With financial counseling, the person comes in because they have a specific issue or challenge that needs to be addressed, and so that's what they work towards, and then they solve it. That's counseling. In coaching, you're developing more of a relational type of situation, where the person is going to be there for a while, and you do build an amount of trust where you'll discuss things with them that you probably wouldn't discuss with your own family necessarily. So it depends on what the situation and the person needs.
Yeah, And I think also on the divorce point, we know that can be a very traumatic experience for people, and so it would be important not to make any major financial decisions right away, and especially be working on the emotional healing at the same time as addressing the financial issues. So really probably being very extra cautious with money, recognizing that you're in a very emotional place.
And it's especially hard in a divorce situation if one person really handled the finances and paid the bills and the other person didn't. And now they've got to learn how to do that. But hopefully they'll recognize that and get some assistance in learning it and get some education how to do it.
Yeah, that's a great time. It's recognizing if you're lacking some skills or some knowledge, or because the financial situation might change so much, that might be a real important point in time to reach out for financial counseling or coaching or just some additional support in that area. So what about our next question?
How does the transition of having children affect couples' financial status, and what are some ways to navigate this added stress?
Okay, and just in reference to the last question as well, that's a change in circumstance. Okay, we're going to have a child, and chances are they're not going to be absolutely scot-free the whole time they're with us. So we're going to have additional expenses. Okay, so what we have to do is sit down and adjust our budget to absorb those additional expenses. Okay, and that's just a matter of, again, you know, projecting out what are we going to have. Are we going to be paying for childcare? Because that would be a biggie. If we're going to absorb that cost, what are we going to adjust, you know, so we can afford it? Okay, so it's a matter of sitting down and revising your spending plan to reflect that new reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, great. So what about a couple that does have very different viewpoints about spending? So let's say we have one partner that loves luxury, high-end types of living, and then the other person who is a real frugal saver and doesn't like to spend anything. So what if they did end up together, right? And how could they navigate that? Because that would seem to be something that would be a very long-standing issue for them.
Okay, well, hopefully on the personal side of the relationship, that, you know, usually two people don't meet and they're absolutely 100% compatible. You know, there's usually a little bit of give and take. That's, you know, and you kind of, I always look at it as like practicing the giving and take. When it comes to the financial differences that are so broad, those definitely need to be talked about up front. And neither one is good or bad, okay, but they're not necessarily compatible or relational. So we need to sit down and figure out, all right, where is the middle, okay? And as we talked about earlier, a spending plan can actually accommodate both people, okay, as long as, you know, if the obligations are being covered, if the living expenses are being covered, if there's money being put aside for emergencies and for our financial goals, then we can carve it out so we have some left over, so we can still, you know, I can go, you know, buy my expensive stuff while you're going over and saving, you know, everything. So a spending plan would allow us to do that. As long as it doesn't impact the spending plan, we're not taking from it, then that's okay. We can meet there as a compromise.
And it seems like in some ways, obviously differences between partners in a couple relationship can lead to some strife in some situations, but in some ways that could be something where they could really help each other, right? So the person who's the ultimate saver and doesn't like to spend any money, maybe they need the reminder that it's okay to spend some money or to be, you know, kind of enjoying some of the money as long as it fits in the spending plan, right? Mm-hmm. But then also somebody who's a big spender, they could really benefit from learning some things from the saver. So it seems like in some ways that is a nice way that people can complement each other.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, it's the yin and yang of it, right? Mm-hmm. So you have people where, you know, you have some strengths that I don't have, and I have some that you don't have. So let's bring them together, and together we're that much stronger.
Right. Yeah. And so working together and appreciating that about each other seems like it would be really helpful. One other specific situation that I wanted to ask you about was we know that couples who are experiencing a lot of debt can be a very stressful situation, and I imagine that's a big reason why most people probably reach out to you. So if we're talking about a couple now that has a lot of debt that they find overwhelming, what would be some important action steps for them to take?
Okay. And there's a lot of reasons that people find themselves in a lot of debt, and it's not necessarily always their fault, you know, and sometimes it's people who have some business debt that was in their own personal name. The first step would be to make an appointment to sit down with a financial counselor or a financial coach who can help identify where you stand right now, and then based on that, let you know what options you have and resources you have available to you, okay? A good counselor or coach will also refer you or even help you speak to your creditors to see if they offer programs that will help you with a repayment plan. And a third option that needs to be explored is to sit down with a bankruptcy attorney and explore that as an option. A lot of people think bankruptcy is stealing, but it's not stealing. Okay, it's federal law. It's not done in an alleyway at night. It's done in bright sunlight in federal court. Okay, and if people say, well, but you know, I really owe them the money, you can always pay them back on a timely basis after the bankruptcy. But then when you have the information from the counselor, information from your creditors, and the information from the bankruptcy attorney in front of you, then the couple can sit there and discuss the pros and cons of each one and make an informed decision as to how to do it. But anything can be handled. There's nothing else impossible.
So reaching out for help, communicating about it, getting information, and doing your research to figure out what your options are, and then working together to come up with a plan sounds like the path that you're laying out there. So let's talk generally, now that we've talked about some specific financial situations. What would you say, just real broadly, are some general strategies that couples can use to strengthen the financial aspects of their relationships? I know you've already mentioned the spending plan. What else would you add to that?
Okay, well, to be honest with you, that's the glue that holds everything together, okay? So to not only create that spending plan, but to make sure that everybody in the household is involved in it, to make sure that it stays alive and stays relevant, okay? And you learn how to work it, okay? Because that way, if you have a challenge, the family can sit down and figure out, okay, how are we going to cover this new expense or this new challenge, okay? Once that's done, then you can start to establish some goals, all right? And you would have short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. Now, a lot of times, you know, people don't have financial goals. Why? Because they're not exercising control over their financing. And if you don't have control over something, you can't have a goal for it. So by having control of your finances, it opens up a whole new horizon of where you can have financial goals. And it could be purchasing a house. It could be paying for college for your kids. It could be getting a vacation home. But now they're within reach because you can create a plan that will help you get there, and you see the path to get there.
So it sounds like one thing that's really helpful for couples to do together is sort of dream together about what would they like, and then step back from those dreams and convert them into goals and specific action steps that they can take.
Absolutely, and that's how, you know, we can achieve. And the thing that's important to remember is if a couple is just starting to really take spending plans and budgeting seriously, that, you know, celebrate and be happy about the initial victories. They're going to be small. The initial achievements are going to be small. But celebrate them, okay? When we teach a class on budgeting, and we have, in our example, our couple save $33 a month, that's their target. And people in the class say, well, Tom, what's $33 in your savings account going to do for you? Say, who in this room would love to have $33 a month in their savings account since the day they were born? Right. Okay? And it's a victory. They get to the end of the month, and they have money that wasn't spent, and it's in their savings account. That's a victory, and that needs to be celebrated.
Right, and that really, the idea of celebrating really makes me think about just viewing yourself as a team with each other, right? And so celebrating along the way, like you're saying, if somebody was trying to save $100,000 to pay for a house or something, like a major expense like that, obviously that's going to take some time. If they've got a huge income, but even still, it would take some time, right? So celebrate every $100 or every $1,000 along the way. So set some really concrete goals that together they can be working on, and that's talking about and having good communication along the way.
Absolutely. To go from living paycheck to paycheck to actually having money left over in their savings account end of the month is a major victory.
It sounds like, too, there's a piece of that that speaks to the importance of focusing on your own journey and not comparing your journey to somebody else's, because somebody else might look like they're really prospering in a way that you would really like to be doing, but for you, your victory might be saving that $33 a month, and that's a huge thing for you, and you shouldn't feel discouraged because you're comparing yourself to somebody else.
And if you have somebody who's very security orientated, and that security is tied to how much is in their savings account, and the other person, you know, not so much, by going through this experience together is bringing them into the middle, someplace where they can make a great relationship survive.
Yeah, that's a great point. Looks like we have a question.
We do. Once couples are married, should they have joint bank accounts or separate bank accounts, and what issues or benefits come from having either?
Well, there's no right or wrong way of doing that. It's really what each of the partners agrees to is the best fit for them. Okay, there are certain good reasons to have joint accounts. There are certain good reasons to have separate accounts. Just because a couple has separate accounts doesn't mean they're secret accounts. Okay, so they can have separate accounts and still be well aware of what's in that account. So for instance, let's say somebody is self-employed, okay, and they're in a type of business where they're subject to getting sued, okay. They may want to have separate accounts, okay, so that we can protect this money over here. So there are legitimate reasons for separate accounts, but there's never a legitimate reason for keeping that account from the other person.
I would add too, I think that the way that question was asked was sort of as an either or, but it really could be both. And I think in a lot of cases it's helpful for people to have a joint account or multiple joint accounts, and then also some individual. And for some couples that might just be most of the money is joined, but maybe there's a small separate side account that people have where they each allocate a certain amount every month that they can spend, and that's especially nice if you want to buy a gift for your partner and have it be a surprise.
Well, there are a lot of married couples where they have a joint account and they know what their monthly expenses are, and they put just enough, each one contributes to that account each month, and the expenses are paid out of that. And then you also have their own account for the rest of their income that they can, because they want to be able to write a check without worrying about what the balance is, that kind of thing, or debit card.
I think the key is really then looking at, like you said, there's not a right or wrong, but I would say that they should really take an honest look at what does this mean for our relationship, right? And so or do we not trust each other if we're afraid to combine our finances? Or do we not have any sort of separate identity in our relationship if we're combining everything?
Well, and that may help two people who have totally different values towards money actually meet in the middle. Okay, the middle will be covering our living expenses, but then we'll also have our side accounts where I can save everything and you can go ahead and spend everything.
Yeah. So there's a lot of creative solutions and different ways that people can handle this.
As long as they talk.
Let's see, so you've mentioned a little bit about the difference between financial counseling and financial coaching. So could you talk a little bit more about the resources that an agency like yours provides and what other resources somebody might find in a community that could help them if they are wanting to seek some additional support?
In our agency, we keep track of all the resources in the community. So it's a wide range of resources depending upon what the particular client needs, okay? But there are a lot of resources out there, and the best way to get in touch with them is to call any nonprofit in your community, because they all will keep a list of resources that are available. Also, you can call United Way's 211, which is an excellent resource about resources, okay? Even if you need help with something as far as emergency help, that's a good resource to access. But resources are something that helps, gives us an additional aid to help us, get to that next step a lot of times. So it's good information to have. There are some online resource sites, like benefitscheckup.org is a good one. If you go to that website, it's going to ask you like 40 questions about yourself, but answer all 40 questions and then hit enter, and it's going to come up with a whole list of programs and benefits and resources that you're going to be 99% qualified for. Well, Tom, 40 questions, why isn't it 100%? Because some programs and benefits are geared towards a target population, like hurricane victims, okay? But that's an online resource that's excellent. It has a lot of local information, too.
That's great. And it seems like what's really important would be making sure that you're going to a credible source of support, because there are, especially when we're talking about debt, there are some unscrupulous, I guess, unqualified or potentially scams. This is definitely an area where you have to be cautious and make sure that you're, and your organization is part of a national accrediting organization, right? So can you give the name of the national organization?
Any CCCS, including us, is a member of the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, which is it's the largest nationwide organization of consumer credit counseling agencies. They require their agencies to be accredited by the Council on Accreditation on a biannual basis, which is a very stringent audit, and they have very strict rules on how you have to conduct yourself. So when I have family or friends from around the country who will call me and say, well, how can I find an agency near me? I tell them, look for an agency that's accredited by COA. You automatically have credibility, okay? But also being a United Way agency is also a symptom of being a credible agency and stuff. And all of our counselors are nationally certified for credit counseling, financial counseling, and for housing counseling.
And I think also people should really kind of evaluate if their issue is a financial issue, if it's a relational issue, in which case they might go for marriage counseling or relationship counseling or even individual counseling, or it might be both, right? So those services really could kind of go hand in hand as well.
Right, but usually each group has their own specialty.
Right.
So being a financial counselor doesn't make you a marriage counselor.
Yeah.
Now you've seen marriages survive challenges, and you can relay that information, you know. So it's like if you have a couple coming in, they just feel like they're at opposite ends of the spectrum and there's no give or take. The counselor probably has seen couples survive this and be successful at it. And that kind of knowledge and confidence and experience can be very helpful to a client.
Yeah, definitely. So really taking a hard look at which types of help would be most beneficial. So before we wrap up, what do you think is the most important piece of advice that you can offer to help couples work together to build a strong financial foundation for their relationship?
I would encourage them to accept the concept that as human beings we are planning animals. Okay, we don't like doing anything without a plan, and we are at our absolute most comfortable best when we are making a plan, using a plan, and adjusting a plan, okay, because that is our comfort level, okay. We remember how to get home from work because we had a plan stored in our brain for that route, okay. So accept the fact that we're planning animals, and if we could just take that same skill set, that same drive to create a plan and create a plan for our financial future and our financial relationship. That's the biggest thing of advice I would love for people to take, you know, home with them.
Yeah, and your point about driving to work also made me think that it's also about habits too, right? So once you're doing a habit that's working for you, you don't have to work so hard.
Right.
So a lot of this is really kind of behavioral and looking at specific changes that you can make that might be hard in the beginning, but once you know the route home and you've done it 50 times, you don't have to think about it as much, or you don't have to make as many decisions. So it's about getting yourself on the right path and getting those habits in place.
And also, both people in a relationship are adjusting to the middle. So they're eventually going to meet and be even more compatible than when they started.
Yeah, and so being willing to work together is really important too. So, well, it's been a great conversation. Do you have any other final thoughts that you'd like to share before we wrap up today?
The very last thing I'd like to say is I want you to know that you can do it, okay? This is possible. You can remove financial stress from your life forever. You can achieve financial goals. You can be financially flourishing and comfortable. Okay, it is possible. It's just a matter of taking the first step.
Yeah, and along with that, you can have a healthy relationship too, right? And really they go hand in hand. As you're working on improving your finances, you can also be really strengthening your relationship at the same time. And I'm so glad you ended with that thought, because I think that these are topics that can be very heavy for a lot of people, very stressful, and very discouraging, because as you mentioned earlier, making those changes can take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it may not feel like you're making the progress that you wish that you were making. So I'm really glad that you ended on that positive note too, and hopefully that's something that everyone can take away with them from today's program. So before everybody signs off, we do want to thank you again for being here today, and we hope that what we talked about is information that's useful for you and that will help strengthen your relationship, and in today's program's case, also help you to strengthen your financial future as well. We do welcome your feedback, and Camilla is going to post the link for that in the chat room. We always love hearing from you about your experience with the program, and that helps us to improve future programs. And just as a heads up, the next HRI Relationship Booster is going to be on Friday, April 5th. And our topic for that one will be on supporting a partner who has a history of trauma. So again, we want to thank you for being here with us today, and we hope that it was helpful for you in building healthier relationships in your life. Thank you again.